standing in the pouring rain outside my childhood home on Christmas Eve, clutching a single suitcase and listening to my father's voice echo through the closed door. "You're not welcome here anymore, Elena. Don't come back." The porch light that had guided me home for 26 years flickered off, leaving me in complete darkness. What I didn't know was that exactly 1 week later, I'd be holding a lottery ticket worth $47 million, and my family would be singing a very different tune. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from. And if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. The morning of December 23rd started like any other Wednesday in my cramped studio apartment in downtown Portland. My alarm buzzed at 6:30 a.m., the same time it had for the past 3 years since I'd graduated from community college and started working at Morrison's Auto Parts. The December rain hammered against my single window, creating rivulets that blurred the view of the brick wall across the narrow alley. I'd been planning this Christmas visit for months. After missing last year's gathering due to a nasty bout of flu, I was determined to make it home to Cedar Falls, the small Oregon town where I grew up. My paycheck from Morrison's barely covered rent and groceries, but I'd managed to save enough for bus fare and modest gifts for everyone. Nothing fancy: a scented candle for Mom, a book about vintage cars for Dad, and a makeup palette for my younger sister Chloe that I'd found on clearance. The bus ride from Portland to Cedar Falls took 4 hours, winding through pine forests and past farms dusted with early winter snow. I spent most of the journey staring out the window, remembering childhood car trips along this same route. Back then, Dad would point out landmarks, and Mom would pack elaborate picnic lunches. Chloe and I would play endless rounds of 20 questions, our voices filling the car with laughter. Those memories felt distant now, separated by years of growing apart and the slow erosion of family bonds that happens when life pulls everyone in different directions. After high school, Chloe had gotten a full scholarship to Oregon State and was now in her senior year studying business. She'd always been the smart one, the one with the plan. I'd struggled through community college, changing majors twice before, settling on general studies, and even then barely scraped by with a 2.3 GPA. The family dynamic had shifted over the years. Dad, who ran a successful construction company, had always been proud of Chloe's achievements. Mom, a nurse at the local hospital, beamed whenever anyone asked about her college daughter. I was the one who worked retail, who lived paycheck to paycheck, who couldn't seem to get her life together despite being the older sister. The bus pulled into Cedar Falls just after 2 p.m. The town looked exactly the same as it had when I left. The same weathered main street, the same cluster of shops that had been struggling to compete with the big box stores for years, the same faded Christmas decorations hanging from lampposts. I shouldered my duffel bag and started the familiar walk to Elm Street, where my family's 2-story colonial sat behind a white picket fence that Dad repainted every other summer. The house looked different somehow. The front yard was immaculate, with professional landscaping that definitely hadn't been there during my last visit. A new BMW sat in the driveway next to Dad's work truck, and the entire exterior had been freshly painted in a warm cream color with dark green shutters. Even the front door was new, a heavy oak piece with decorative glass panels that probably cost more than I made in 2 months. I knocked instead of using my key, unsure if the locks had been changed along with everything else. Mom answered, and for a moment, her face lit up with genuine surprise and joy. "Elena? Sweetheart, you made it." She pulled me into a tight hug that smelled like her favorite vanilla perfume and the cinnamon cookies she always baked for Christmas. "We weren't sure if you'd be able to get away from work. I requested the time off weeks ago," I said, stepping into the foyer that now featured an elegant console table and a mirror with an ornate silver frame. "The place looks amazing, Mom. You've really done some renovating." Her expression shifted slightly, and she busied herself taking my coat. "Your father's business has been doing very well lately. We've been able to make some improvements we'd been putting off for years. The living room had been completely transformed. Gone was the comfortable but worn furniture I remembered from my childhood, replaced with a sleek sectional sofa in charcoal, gray, and a glass coffee table that looked like something from a magazine. A massive flat-screen TV dominated one wall, and built-in shelving displayed an array of decorative objects that looked expensive and untouchable. "Where's Dad?" I asked, settling carefully onto the new sofa. "He's in his office, finishing up some paperwork before the holiday. Chloe should be home from Eugene in a few hours. She's driving up after her last final exam." Mom sat across from me, and I noticed she was wearing clothes I'd never seen before. A cashmere sweater in deep burgundy, designer jeans, and jewelry that caught the light from the chandelier that had replaced the old ceiling fan. We chatted for a while about safe topics, the weather, my job, her work at the hospital, but there was an undercurrent of tension I couldn't identify. Mom kept glancing toward the hallway that led to Dad's office, and her responses felt rehearsed, like she was following a script. Dad finally emerged around 4 p.m., looking every inch, the successful businessman in his pressed khakis and polo shirt. He'd lost weight since I'd last seen him, and his hair was shorter, more styled. He gave me a quick hug that felt perfunctory. "Elena, good to see you made it safely." His tone was polite but distant, the way he might greet a client. "It's good to be home," I said, trying to inject warmth into my voice. "The house looks incredible. Business must really be booming." Something flickered across his face, pride mixed with something else I couldn't quite read. "We've been blessed with some good fortune lately, hard work paying off, you know." Before I could ask what he meant, Chloe burst through the front door with her usual energy. At 22, she was everything I wasn't: confident, polished, successful. Her dark hair was perfectly styled even after a 4-hour drive, and she wore the kind of outfit that looked effortless but probably cost more than my monthly rent. "Elena." She hugged me enthusiastically, and for a moment everything felt normal again. "I'm so glad you're here. It's been way too long." We spent the rest of the afternoon catching up. Chloe was excited about graduating in the spring and had already lined up internships with 2 major companies in Portland. She talked about her boyfriend, Marcus, a law student she'd been dating for over a year, and their plans to move in together after graduation. "What about you?" she asked as we helped Mom prepare dinner. "Any interesting guys in your life?" I laughed, trying to keep it light. "Barely have time for dating between work and trying to pay rent. Portland's expensive. Maybe you should think about moving back here," Mom suggested, but her tone suggested she was just being polite. Rent would certainly be cheaper. "Not much opportunity in Cedar Falls for someone with my skills," I said. "Unless Morrison's wants to open a branch here." The comment was meant as a joke, but it fell flat. An uncomfortable silence settled over the kitchen until Dad announced that dinner was ready. The dining room had received the same upscale treatment as the rest of the house. The old wooden table where we'd eaten countless family meals had been replaced with a glass-topped piece that seated 8, surrounded by chairs that looked like they belonged in a high-end restaurant. Mom had set the table with china I'd never seen before, and crystal glasses that caught the light from yet another new chandelier. Dinner itself was awkward. The conversation felt forced, with long pauses that hadn't existed during family meals in the past. Dad talked about his business expansion plans, mentioning contracts with major developers and projects that would take his company to the next level. Mom discussed the hospital's new wing and her promotion to head nurse. Chloe shared stories from college and her excitement about entering the corporate world. I found myself with little to contribute. My job at Morrison's was hardly glamorous, and my life in Portland felt small and insignificant compared to their achievements. When they asked about my plans for the future, I gave vague answers about maybe taking some online courses or looking for better opportunities. "You know," Dad said as we finished the main course, "it's never too late to go back to school. Get a real degree in something marketable." The comment stung, even though I knew he meant it as encouragement. Community. College gave me a real degree, I said quietly. Of course it did, Mom said quickly, shooting Dad a warning look. He just meant that with your potential, you could probably do even more. The rest of dinner passed in relative silence. Afterward, while Mom and Chloe cleaned up, I offered to help but was told they had it handled. I found myself sitting alone, in the pristine living room, feeling like a stranger in my own childhood home. Later that evening, we gathered to exchange gifts. The presents under the tree were wrapped in expensive paper and tied with elaborate bows that looked professionally done. I watched as my family opened gifts that clearly cost hundreds of dollars. A designer purse for Mom, high-end golf clubs for Dad, and a tablet computer for Chloe. When it came time for my gifts, I felt embarrassed by their modest presentation. The scented candle I'd bought for Mom looked cheap next to the luxury items she'd just unwrapped. Dad thanked me politely for the book, but I could tell he was disappointed. Only Chloe seemed genuinely pleased with the makeup palette, though I suspected she was just being kind. "These are lovely, Elena," Mom said, holding up the candle. "Very thoughtful." The word thoughtful hung in the air like a consolation prize. Christmas Eve morning brought the first real conflict. I was in the kitchen making coffee when I overheard my parents talking in hushed voices in the living room. "She's been here less than 2 days, and I can already see the tension," Dad was saying. "This was supposed to be a celebration." "She's our daughter," Mom replied. "She has a right to be here." "Does she, though? Look around, Margaret. Look at what we've built, what we've achieved. And then look at her. 26 years old, working retail, no real prospects. She's a reminder of everything we used to be." The words hit me like a physical blow. I set down my coffee mug with shaking hands, suddenly understanding the distance I'd felt since arriving. "That's cruel, Richard," Mom said, but her voice lacked conviction. "Is it? Or is it honest? Chloe's about to graduate summa cum laude. She's got job offers from Fortune 500 companies. She's dating a future lawyer. She represents everything we've worked toward. Elena represents everything we've left behind." I couldn't listen anymore. I grabbed my coat and slipped out the back door, needing air and space to process what I'd heard. The backyard had been landscaped too, with a flagstone patio and garden beds that looked like something from a home improvement show. Even the old swing set where Chloe and I had played as children had been removed and replaced with elegant outdoor furniture. A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now, back to where we left off. I walked to the end of the yard, where a small gap in the fence had always been my escape route to the woods beyond. The trees were bare now, their branches reaching toward a gray December sky that matched my mood. I sat on a fallen log and tried to make sense of what was happening. My family had clearly come into money somehow. The house renovations, the new car, the expensive gifts and clothes all pointed to a significant change in their financial situation. But more than that, they seemed to have embraced a new identity that didn't include me. I was no longer Elena, their daughter and sister. I was a reminder of a life they wanted to forget. When I returned to the house an hour later, I found Chloe waiting for me in the kitchen. Her expression was troubled, and I realized she'd probably overheard the same conversation. "Elena, I need to tell you something," she said, her voice uncharacteristically serious, "about why everything's so different here." I sat down across from her at the breakfast nook, which was the only piece of furniture in the house that hadn't been replaced. "I'm listening." Dad's company landed a huge contract 6 months ago, some big development project that's worth millions. But more than that, Mom and Dad bought lottery tickets as a joke for their anniversary last year, and one of them actually won. Not the jackpot, but enough to change everything. The pieces started to fall into place. How much? $3 million after taxes. They've been living like they've always had money, joining the country club, making friends with other wealthy families in town. They're embarrassed by their old life. And I'm part of that old life, I said. Chloe nodded miserably. They love you, Elena, but they're scared that having you around will remind people of who they used to be. Dad, especially. He's worked so hard to build this image of himself as a successful businessman, and now with the money backing it up, he feels like he can finally be the person he's always wanted to be. The conversation was interrupted by Mom calling us to help with lunch preparations. The rest of Christmas Eve passed in a haze of forced normalcy. We went through the motions of our traditional activities, watching holiday movies, playing board games, preparing for the next day's festivities. But the undercurrent of tension remained, and I caught my parents exchanging meaningful looks when they thought I wasn't watching. That evening, as we prepared for bed, the confrontation finally came. I was in my old bedroom, which had been converted into a guest room with generic furniture and neutral decor. None of my childhood belongings remained. No trophies from high school track, no photos of friends, no evidence that this had ever been my space. I was packing my few belongings when Dad appeared in the doorway. "We need to talk," he said, his expression grim. I followed him downstairs to his office, a room that had been completely transformed into a sophisticated home office with leather, furniture, and built-in bookshelves. Mom was already there, sitting in one of the chairs facing his desk. Chloe was nowhere to be seen. "Sit down, Elena," Dad said, settling behind his desk like he was conducting a business meeting. I remained standing. "If you have something to say, just say it." Dad sighed and leaned back in his chair. "This isn't easy for any of us, but we've been talking and we think it would be best if you left tomorrow morning." The words didn't fully register at first. "Left? It's Christmas." "We know what day it is," Mom said quietly. "But your presence here is creating tension that we don't need right now." "What tension? I've barely said anything since I got here." Dad stood up, his expression hardening. "That's exactly the problem, Elena. You don't say anything because you don't have anything to contribute. You sit there like a ghost of our past, reminding everyone of who we used to be." "Who you used to be?" I couldn't keep the incredulity out of my voice. "You mean a normal family who loved each other regardless of how much money they had? We still love each other," Mom interjected. "But love isn't always enough. Sometimes you have to make hard choices for the good of the family." "And I'm not good for the family?" Dad walked around his desk to face me directly. "You're 26 years old, Elena. You work at an auto parts store, you live in a studio apartment, and you have no real prospects for improving your situation. Meanwhile, your sister is about to graduate from a top university and has her pick of high-paying jobs. We've worked hard to build something here, to create opportunities and connections that will benefit Chloe's future. What does that have to do with me?" "Everything," he said bluntly. "The people we associate with now, the opportunities we're creating, they depend on image and perception. Having a daughter who works retail and can barely afford to visit for Christmas doesn't fit the narrative we're building." The cruelty of his words took my breath away. "So you're choosing your new friends over your own daughter?" "We're choosing Chloe's future over your inability to grow up and take responsibility for your life," Dad replied. "We've given you every opportunity to succeed, Elena. We paid for your college. We supported you when you changed majors multiple times. We've helped you financially more times than I can count. And what do you have to show for it?" "I have a job. I pay my own rent. I'm doing my best." "Your best isn't good enough," he said flatly. "And we're tired of pretending it is." Mom stood up, her face pale but resolute. "We think it would be better for everyone if you made your own way from now on. No more family gatherings, no more asking for help when you can't make ends meet. It's time for you to figure out how to be an adult without using us as a safety net." I looked between them, searching for any sign of the parents who had raised me, who had cheered at my high school track meets and helped me with homework and told me they loved me no matter what. But those people seemed to have disappeared, replaced by strangers who valued money and status over family. "So that's it?" You're cutting me off because I'm not successful enough for your new lifestyle? We're giving you the motivation you need to finally make something of yourself, Dad said. Sometimes tough love is the only thing that works. This isn't tough love, I said, my voice breaking. This is abandonment. I turned to leave, but Dad's voice stopped me. Elena, don't make this harder than it needs to be. Take the morning bus back to Portland and focus on building a life you can be proud of. When you've accomplished something meaningful, when you can contribute to this family instead of just taking from it, then we can talk about having you back. I walked out of his office without another word, my legs barely carrying me up the stairs. To the guest room. I threw my belongings into my suitcase, my hands shaking with a combination of hurt and rage. The house felt like a tomb around me, beautiful and cold and lifeless. As I was closing my suitcase, Chloe appeared in the doorway. Her eyes were red from crying. Elena, I'm so sorry, she whispered. I tried to talk them out of it, but they won't. Listen. It's not your fault, I said, though part of me wondered if she could have tried harder. They've made their choice. Where will you go? The buses don't run on Christmas. I'll figure it out. I picked up my suitcase and headed for the door. Take care of yourself, Chloe. I hope everything works out the way you want it to. She grabbed my arm as I passed. Don't give up on us, okay? This won't last forever. When they come to their senses, they'll know where to find me, I said. But I'm not going to hold my breath. I walked downstairs and out the front door without saying goodbye to my parents. The December air was biting, and snow had started to fall, creating a white blanket over the perfect lawn and pristine landscaping. I stood on the sidewalk for a moment, looking back at the house that no longer felt like home. The porch light flickered on and I saw my father's silhouette in the living room window. For a moment, I thought he might come outside, might realize what he was doing and call me back. Instead, he reached up and turned off the light, leaving me standing in the darkness. I started walking toward downtown, pulling my suitcase behind, me through the snow. Cedar Falls looked like a Christmas card, with lights twinkling in windows and decorations adorning every storefront. Families were gathered in warm houses, sharing meals and gifts and love. And I was alone on the street, cast out from the only family I'd ever known. The walk to the bus station took 20 minutes, but it felt like hours. My hands were numb from the cold, and my suitcase wheels kept getting stuck in the snow. When I finally reached the small station, I found it closed for the holiday. A sign on the door informed me that service would resume on December 26th. I sat on the bench outside the station, trying to figure out what to do next. The snow was falling, harder now, and the temperature was dropping. I had $43 in my wallet, and nowhere to go until the buses started running again. That's when I remembered the Starlight Motel on the edge of town. It wasn't much, a rundown place that catered to truckers and travelers on a budget, but it would have to do. I called from the payphone outside the station and learned they had one room available for the night. The walk to the motel took another half hour. By the time I arrived, I was soaked through and shivering uncontrollably. The desk clerk, a tired-looking woman in her 50s, took pity on me and threw in a cup of coffee from the lobby's ancient. Machined room 12 was exactly what I expected. Thin carpet, faded wallpaper, and furniture that had seen better decades. But it was warm and dry, and the bed was clean. I sat on the edge of the mattress and finally allowed myself to cry. The tears came in waves, carrying with them years of feeling like I wasn't good enough, smart enough, successful enough. I cried for the family I'd lost, for the parents who had chosen status over love, for the sister who hadn't fought hard enough to keep me. I cried for the little girl who had grown up in that house believing she was loved unconditionally, only to learn that love could be conditional after all. When the tears finally stopped, I was exhausted but strangely clear-headed. My family had made their choice, and now I had to make mine. I could let this destroy me, or I could use it as motivation to prove them wrong. Not for their sake, but for mine. I spent Christmas Day alone in that motel room, eating vending machine sandwiches and watching old movies on the small television. It was the loneliest day of my life, but it was also the day I decided to stop, waiting for other people to believe in me. If my own family wouldn't support me, then I'd have to be my own support system. The next morning, I took the first bus back to Portland, staring out the window at the familiar landscape and feeling like I was seeing it for the first time. The girl who had made this journey 2 days earlier was gone, replaced by someone harder and more determined. I had no idea that in just 5 days, everything would change again in ways I couldn't possibly imagine. The winning lottery ticket was already in my purse, purchased on a whim at the gas station where the bus had stopped for a break. I hadn't even checked the numbers yet. But fate, it seemed, had plans for me that went far beyond my family's limited imagination. The bus ride back to Portland felt endless. I pressed my forehead against the cold window and watched the Oregon countryside blur past, my reflection staring back at me like a ghost. The other passengers were mostly families returning from holiday visits, their faces glowing with contentment and their arms full of gift bags. I clutched my single suitcase and tried to ignore the conversations around me about wonderful Christmas, mornings, and family traditions. When we stopped at a gas station in Salem for a bathroom break, I bought a cup of terrible coffee and stood outside in the parking lot, breathing in the crisp air. A group of teenagers was gathered around a car, laughing and playing music from their phone. Their joy felt foreign to me now, like something from another planet. Back on the bus, I found myself sitting next to an elderly man named Walter, who was returning to Portland after visiting his grandchildren in Eugene. He had kind eyes behind, wire-rimmed glasses, and spoke with the gentle patience of someone who had lived through enough disappointments to understand that life rarely goes according to plan. "Rough Christmas?" he asked, noticing my red-rimmed eyes. I nodded, not trusting my voice. "Family can be the greatest blessing and the deepest wound," he said quietly. "Sometimes the people who are supposed to love us unconditionally are the ones who hurt us most." We talked for the rest of the journey about small things: his career as a librarian, his late wife's passion for gardening, the books that had sustained him through difficult times. His words were like a balm, reminding me that kindness still existed in the world, even from strangers. When the bus pulled into Portland's downtown station, Walter pressed a small piece of paper into my hand. "My granddaughter's number," he explained. "She's about your age and works at a nonprofit downtown. If you ever need someone to talk to, or if you're looking for opportunities to make a difference, give her a call." I tucked the paper into my wallet next to the lottery ticket I'd bought during our stop, still unchecked and forgotten. My studio apartment felt smaller than ever when I unlocked the door that evening. The space that had seemed cozy before now felt cramped and depressing. A Murphy bed that doubled as a couch, a kitchenette with barely enough counter space for a coffee maker, and a single window that looked out onto the narrow alley between buildings. This was my life. 400 square feet of barely making it. I dropped my suitcase by the door and stood in the middle of the room, suddenly overwhelmed by the silence. For the past 3 years, this apartment had been my sanctuary, my proof that I could make it on my own even if I wasn't setting the world on fire. Now it felt like evidence of everything my father had accused me of: mediocrity, lack of ambition, settling for less. The next few days passed in a haze of routine and numbness. I returned to work at Morrison's Auto Parts, where my manager, Jake, barely acknowledged my presence beyond asking if I'd had a good holiday. I smiled and said yes, because what else could I say? That my family had disowned me on Christmas Eve? That I'd spent Christmas Day alone in a motel room eating stale sandwiches? Morrison's was exactly the kind of place you'd expect to find in an older part of Portland. A narrow building squeezed between a laundromat and a used bookstore, with fluorescent lights that buzzed constantly, and shelves packed floor to ceiling with car parts that most people couldn't identify. I worked the counter, helping mechanics and do-it-yourself car enthusiasts find what they needed, processing orders, and trying to make sense of Jake's chaotic inventory system. My coworkers were a mixed group. There was Dmitri, a Russian immigrant, in his 50s, who knew more about engines than anyone I'd ever met, but spoke broken English that customers sometimes struggled to understand. Maria, a single mother of two who worked part-time while studying accounting at Portland Community College. And Tommy, a 19-year-old kid who treated the job like an extended hangout session with his friends, but somehow managed to charm even the grumpiest customers. None of them knew about my family situation, and I intended to keep it that way. The last thing I needed was pity from people who were just trying to get through their own struggles. Wednesday, December 30th, started like any other day. I arrived at Morrison's at 8:30, unlocked the front door, and turned on the ancient cash register that took 5 minutes to boot up. The morning was slow. A few regulars looking for oil filters and brake pads, a woman whose husband had sent her to find spark plugs for their lawnmower. Around 11, during a lull between customers, I was reorganizing the windshield wiper display when Maria approached me with her phone in hand. "Elena, did you buy a lottery ticket this week?" she asked, her voice strangely excited. I looked up from the packages of wipers I'd been arranging. Why? Because someone in Oregon just won $47 million, and they haven't claimed it yet. The winning numbers were announced this morning for the December 26th drawing. She held up her phone, showing me a news article. The ticket was sold at a gas station in Salem. Salem, the bus stop where I'd bought coffee and stood in the parking lot feeling sorry for myself. "That's crazy," I said, my heart starting to beat faster. "Imagine winning that much money and not even knowing it. Right? I bet whoever bought it stuck it in their wallet and forgot about it. That happens all the time." Maria scrolled through the article. The numbers were 7, 14, 23, 31, 42, and the Powerball was 18. Can you imagine? Your whole life changes just like that. I excused myself and went to the small employee bathroom in the back of the store. With shaking hands, I pulled out my wallet and found the lottery ticket I'd bought during our bus stop. The paper was slightly crumpled from being pressed between my credit card and driver's license, but the numbers were still clearly visible. 14, 23, 31, 42. Powerball, 18. I stared at the ticket for a full minute, my brain refusing to process what I was seeing. I checked the numbers again, then pulled out my phone and Googled the winning numbers from the December 26th drawing. They matched perfectly. My legs gave out, and I sat down hard on the closed toilet seat, still clutching the ticket. $47 million. The number was so large it didn't feel real. I'd never had more than a few $100s in my bank account at one time. The most expensive thing I owned was my laptop, which had cost me $300 on sale 2 years ago. I tried to do the math in my head. Even after taxes, this would be enough money to never worry about rent again, to never work at a job I didn't love, to travel and pursue dreams I'd never even dared to have. It was enough money to prove my father wrong in the most spectacular way possible. But first, I had to make sure this was real. I spent my lunch break at the library, using their computers to research lottery procedures and verify the winning numbers. Through multiple official sources, everything checked out. The ticket in my wallet was worth $47 million before taxes, approximately $28 million after. I would never have to worry about money again. The rest of my shift passed in a blur. I went through the motions of helping customers and restocking shelves, but my mind was racing with possibilities. I could pay off my student loans, buy a house, maybe even start my own business. I could travel to places I'd only seen in pictures. I could donate to charities and make a real difference in the world. More than anything, I could prove to my family that they had been wrong about me. Dead wrong. When I got home that evening, I called the Oregon Lottery office. A friendly woman named Patricia walked me through the claiming process, explaining that I had 180 days from the drawing date to claim my prize, and that I should sign the back of the ticket immediately to prevent anyone else from claiming it if it was lost or stolen. "Congratulations," she said warmly. "This is going to change your life in ways you can't even imagine yet. I recommend taking some time to think about your options before making any big decisions. Maybe consult with a financial advisor and a lawyer." After hanging up, I sat on my Murphy bed and stared at the ticket I'd carefully signed and placed in a plastic bag. The reality was starting to sink in, but it still felt surreal, like something that happened to other people in movies or news stories. I thought about my family, probably sitting in their renovated house congratulating themselves on their superior life choices. They had no idea that the daughter they'd cast out was now worth more than they could ever dream of being. The irony was almost too perfect, but as the initial shock wore off, other emotions began to surface. Anger at the cosmic joke of it all, winning the lottery just days after being told I was a failure. Sadness that I had no one to share this incredible news with. And underneath it all, a deep sense of vindication mixed with loneliness. I spent the next 2 days researching and planning. I read everything I could find about lottery winners, both the success stories and the cautionary tales. I learned about the importance of assembling a team of professionals, a lawyer, an accountant, a financial advisor. I researched investment strategies and charitable giving options. Most importantly, I tried to wrap my head around what this meant for my future. On New Year's Eve, while the rest of Portland was celebrating, I sat in my tiny apartment with a glass of cheap champagne and made a list of everything I wanted to do with my newfound wealth. Some items were practical: pay off debts, buy a house, invest for the future. Others were dreams I'd never dared to voice: travel to Europe, maybe go back to school, start a foundation to help other young people who felt lost and directionless. At the top of the list, I wrote, "Prove Dad wrong." New Year's Day brought a clarity I hadn't felt in years. I woke up knowing exactly what I needed to do first. I called Patricia at the lottery office and scheduled an appointment to claim my prize. Then I called the number Walter had given me for his granddaughter. Sarah Caldwell worked for a nonprofit organization that helped at-risk youth find stable housing and job training. She was warm and enthusiastic over the phone, and when I mentioned her grandfather, she immediately invited me to coffee. We met at a small cafe in the Pearl District, and I liked her immediately. Sarah was about my age, with short red hair and an energy that made you want to lean in when she talked. She told me about her work, about the young people she helped who had aged out of foster care or been kicked out by families who couldn't accept them. "We see a lot of kids who've been rejected by their families," she said, stirring sugar into her latte. "It's heartbreaking, but it's also inspiring to see how resilient they can be when given the right support." I found myself telling her about my own situation, carefully leaving out the lottery win. She listened without judgment, nodding at all the right places. "Family rejection is a special kind of trauma," she said when I finished. "It cuts deep because these are the people who are supposed to love you unconditionally. But you know what? I've learned from working with kids who've been through similar experiences. Sometimes being forced to rely on yourself is the greatest gift you can receive, even if it doesn't feel like it at the time." After coffee, Sarah offered to show me around the youth center where she worked. It was housed in a converted warehouse in Southeast Portland, with bright murals covering the walls and young people gathered in small groups working on computers, playing games, or just talking with counselors. "We provide temporary housing, job training, educational support, and counseling," Sarah explained as we walked through the facility. "Most of our funding comes from grants and private donations, but it's never enough. We have a waiting list of kids who need help and not enough resources to help them all." I watched a group of teenagers working on resumes with a volunteer counselor, their faces serious with concentration. Another group was in the kitchen learning basic cooking skills. In the corner, a girl who couldn't have been more than 17 was reading to a small child while other young mothers looked on. "These kids are amazing," Sarah continued. "They've been through things that would break most adults, but they keep fighting for a better life. All they need is someone to believe in them and give them a chance. As we finished the tour, an idea began forming in my mind. I had been given an incredible opportunity, not just the money itself, but the chance to make a real difference. I could help kids like these, kids who had been written off by their families and society, but who deserved better. That evening, I called the lottery office and moved up my appointment to claim the prize. It was time to turn this ticket into action. The next morning, I dressed carefully in my best outfit, a black dress I'd bought for job interviews and rarely had occasion to wear. I took the bus downtown to the lottery headquarters, a nondescript office building that looked like any other government facility. Patricia met me in the lobby, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes and a warm smile. She escorted me to a conference room where several other officials were waiting, along with a photographer who would document the official moment. "Before we begin," Patricia said, "I want to make sure you understand your options. You can take the lump sum of approximately $28 million after taxes, or you can take annual payments over 30 years. Most winners choose the lump sum." "Lump sum," I said without hesitation. I had plans for this money, and I didn't want to wait 30 years to implement them. The paperwork took about an hour. I signed document after document, each one making the reality more concrete. When it was finished, Patricia handed me a ceremonial, oversized check for the cameras, and suddenly it was official. I was a millionaire. "What's the first thing you're going to do?" the photographer asked as he snapped pictures. I thought about my family, probably going about their morning routine with no idea that their unsuccessful daughter had just become wealthier than they could imagine. I thought about the kids at Sarah's youth center, waiting for someone to give them a chance. I thought about my own future, suddenly bright with possibility. "I'm going to make a difference," I said. The photographer smiled and took one more shot. "That's what we like to hear." As I left the lottery office with a check for $28 million in my purse, I felt like I was walking into a completely new life. The girl who had been rejected by her family a week ago was gone, replaced by someone with the power to change not just her own circumstances, but the lives of countless others. I had 47 million reasons to prove my father wrong, and I was just getting started. The first thing I did with my lottery winnings was something my family would never expect. I kept working at Morrison's Auto Parts, not because I needed the money anymore, but because I needed time to think and plan without the pressure of everyone knowing what had happened to me. Jake, my manager, noticed a change in my attitude almost immediately. I started arriving early and staying late, volunteering for inventory projects that had been sitting untouched for months. When difficult customers came in complaining about parts or demanding refunds, I handled them with a calm confidence that surprised even me. "You seem different lately," Maria observed during our lunch break on Thursday. "More, I don't know, focused?" I smiled and shrugged. "New year, new me, I guess." What she didn't know was that I had spent the previous evening meeting with Charles Morrison, the owner of the auto parts store. He was a gruff man in his 70s who had built the business from nothing over 4 decades. I found him in his cluttered office above the store, surrounded by invoices and parts catalogs. "Elena? What are you doing here so late?" he asked, looking up from his paperwork. "Mr. Morrison, I have a business proposition for you," I said, settling into the chair across from his desk. For the next hour, I outlined my plan. I wanted to buy Morrison's Auto Parts from him, not to change it, but to expand it. I talked about opening satellite locations in underserved neighborhoods, creating an apprenticeship program for young people interested in automotive careers, and establishing partnerships with local high schools and community colleges. Charles listened without interrupting, his weathered face betraying nothing. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair and studied me for a long moment. "You know, I've been thinking about retiring," he said finally. "My daughter lives in Arizona and wants me to move out there. but I've been worried about what would happen to the business, to the employees. Nothing would happen to them, I assured him. I want to keep everyone on and expand the team. Jake would become general manager of the flagship location. Maria could transition to full-time and we'd pay for her to finish her accounting degree. Dimitri could head up our technical training program. And where exactly are you planning to get the money for all this? Charles asked, raising an eyebrow. I had prepared for this question. I recently came into some money, an inheritance, I said, which wasn't entirely a lie. I'm serious about this, Mr. Morrison. I can have my lawyer draw up a formal offer by next week. 3 days later, I was sitting in the offices of Hartwell and Associates, one of Portland's most prestigious law firms. My attorney, Rebecca Hartwell, was a sharp woman in her 40s who specialized in business acquisitions and estate planning. She had been recommended by the lottery office's list of approved professionals. The Morrison deal is straightforward, she said, sliding a folder across her mahogany desk. He's agreed to your offer of $1.2 million for the business and building. The expansion plans you've outlined are ambitious, but feasible. We spent the next 2 hours going over contracts and discussing the legal structure for my various investments. I was creating a foundation to support youth programs, buying a house in the West Hills, and setting up trust funds and investment accounts that would ensure my financial security for life. I have to ask, Rebecca said as we finished signing documents, what's the real story here? A week ago, you were working retail, and now you're making million-dollar business deals. People don't usually experience this kind of overnight transformation. Had been dreading this conversation with everyone I'd hired to help me. I won the lottery, I said simply. The big one. $47 million. Rebecca's eyebrows shot up. That explains a lot. And also creates some additional considerations we should discuss. Have you thought about publicity, security, family dynamics? Family dynamics, I repeated, thinking about my parents and Chloe. That's going to be interesting. By the end of January, the transformation was complete. I had officially purchased Morrison's Auto Parts and begun implementing my expansion plans. The downtown location was being renovated with better lighting, updated computer systems, and a customer service area that actually looked professional. We had hired 6 new employees and were in negotiations to lease space for our second location in North Portland. I had also moved into my new house, a beautiful craftsman-style home in the West Hills, with a view of the city and Mount Hood. It was the kind of house I had always dreamed of living in, with hardwood floors, a gourmet kitchen, and a library with built-in bookshelves. The backyard had a deck perfect for entertaining and a garden where I could grow vegetables. More importantly, I had established the Fresh Start Foundation with an initial donation of $5 million. Sarah Caldwell had agreed to serve as executive director, and we were already expanding the youth center's programs and capacity. We had opened a second location and were providing housing assistance to 30 additional young people who had aged out of foster care. Through it all, I had maintained complete radio silence with my family. I hadn't called, texted, or made any attempt to contact them since that awful night on Christmas Eve. I knew they assumed I was struggling, probably working extra shifts to make ends meet after losing their financial support. The thought of their smugness both motivated and infuriated me. That changed on February 14th, when the local newspaper ran a feature story about my foundation and its impact on homeless youth. The article included a photo of me at the youth center, surrounded by smiling teenagers, and detailed my background as a local businesswoman and philanthropist. My phone started ringing at 7 a.m. Elena? My mother's voice was tentative, confused. Honey, I just saw the newspaper. There's an article about you and some kind of foundation. I had been expecting this call for weeks, but hearing her voice still sent a jolt through me. Hello, Mom. Elena, what's going on? The article says you're running a foundation that helps homeless kids. And there's something about you buying Morrison's Auto Parts? I don't understand. I could hear the bewilderment in her voice. the inability to reconcile the daughter they had rejected with the successful woman described in the newspaper. "It's pretty straightforward," I said calmly. "I won the lottery and decided to use the money to help people." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. "You won the lottery?" she finally whispered. $47 million, I confirmed. "The ticket I bought on my way back from your house on December 26th. Turns out getting kicked out of my family was the luckiest thing that ever happened to me." Another silence, longer this time. I could hear muffled voices in the background. My father asking what was wrong, my mother trying to explain. "Elena, sweetheart, I think there's been a misunderstanding," Mom said, her voice taking on the placating tone she used when trying to smooth over family conflicts. "Your father and I never meant for you to feel kicked out. We just thought—" "You thought what?" I interrupted. "Do I need tough love? That I was an embarrassment to your new lifestyle? Because I remember the conversation pretty clearly, Mom. Dad told me I wasn't welcome anymore, and that I should focus on making something of myself. Well, mission accomplished." "Can we talk about this in person?" she asked desperately. "As a family? I think we need to clear the air about what happened." I looked around my beautiful new home, at the view of the city spread out below me, at the life I had built without them. "I'm not sure we have anything to talk about," I said. "You made your choice when you decided I wasn't good enough for your new image. I've made mine. Elena, please. You're our daughter. We love you." "Funny how that love only showed up after you read about my success in the newspaper," I replied. "Where was that love on Christmas Eve when you threw me out in the snow?" "Before," she could respond. I hung up. The phone rang again immediately. This time it was Chloe. "Elena, what the hell is going on?" she demanded. "Mom is crying, Dad is pacing around the house muttering about newspapers, and you apparently won the lottery? Why didn't you tell me?" "When exactly was I supposed to tell? You?" I asked. "You haven't called or texted since Christmas Eve. As far as I knew, you were all perfectly happy with your decision to cut me out of the family." "That wasn't my decision," Chloe protested. "I tried to talk them out of it, but they wouldn't listen. I thought about calling you, but I didn't know what to say. You could have said you were sorry. You could have said you missed me. You could have said you disagreed with what they did." "I do disagree with what they did," she said quietly. "I've been telling them for weeks that they made a mistake, that they should call you and apologize. But they're stubborn, Elena. You know how they are." I softened slightly. Chloe had always been caught in the middle of family conflicts, trying to keep everyone happy. "I know," I said. "But it's too late now, Chloe. They showed me who they really are, and I can't unsee that." "So what happens now? Are you just going to cut us off forever?" I considered the question. The truth was, I didn't know what happened now. The anger and hurt were still fresh, but so was the loneliness. Despite everything, these people were still my family. "I don't know," I admitted. "I need time to figure out what I want." "Can I see you?" Chloe asked. "Just me, not them. I want to hear about everything that's happened. And I want to apologize for not fighting harder to keep the family together." Looked at my calendar, full of meetings with contractors, foundation board members, and potential business partners. My new life was busy and fulfilling, but it was also lonely in ways I hadn't expected. "Okay," I said finally. "But not in Cedar Falls. You can come to Portland. I'll show you what I've been building." The transformation was complete, but the real test was just beginning. My family wanted back in now that I had proven myself successful. The question was whether I wanted them back, and on what terms. As I hung up the phone and looked out at the city below, I realized that winning the lottery had been the easy part. The hard part was deciding what kind of person I wanted to be. With this new power, and whether forgiveness was a luxury I could afford, or a necessity I couldn't live without. Chloe arrived in Portland on a rainy Saturday afternoon, looking nervous and unsure of herself in a way I'd never seen before. She stood on my front porch holding a small bouquet of flowers, her eyes wide as she took in the house. "Elena, this place is incredible," she said when I opened the door. "I mean, I knew you'd won money, but seeing it like this..." I led her inside, watching her reaction as she absorbed the hardwood floors, the vaulted ceilings, the view of the city through floor-to-ceiling windows. This wasn't the cramped studio apartment she'd expected to find me in, struggling to make rent and prove our parents wrong. "Coffee?" I asked, gesturing toward the kitchen with its granite countertops and professional-grade appliances. "Please." She followed me, still looking around in amazement. "Elena, I owe you an apology. A huge one. I should have stood up to them. I should have defended you." I poured coffee into 2 mugs, buying myself time to think. Seeing Chloe in my space brought back a flood of memories. Late-night conversations in her dorm room when I'd visit her at college, shopping trips where she'd help me pick out clothes for job interviews, the way she'd always believed in me even when I didn't believe in myself. "You were in an impossible position," I said finally. "I understand why you didn't want to rock the boat." "No, that's not good enough." Chloe's voice was firm, more adult than I'd ever heard her sound. "I was a coward. I let them treat you like garbage because it was easier than standing up to them. You're my sister and I failed you when you needed me most." We sat at my kitchen island, the silence stretching between us. Through the window, I could see downtown Portland spread out below, the life I'd built without any of them. "Tell me about the lottery," Chloe said. "When did you find out? How did it feel?" I told her about discovering the winning numbers at work, about the surreal experience of claiming the prize, about the strange combination of vindication and loneliness that had followed. She listened without interrupting, her face cycling through expressions of amazement, guilt, and something that might have been pride. $47 million, she repeated when I finished. "And you used it to buy a business and start a foundation. That's not what most people would do." "Most people don't get kicked out by their family on Christmas Eve," I replied. "It changes your perspective on what's important." Chloe winced. "About that. Mom and Dad are a mess, Elena. Ever. Since the newspaper article, they've been walking around the house like zombies. Dad keeps muttering about how he should have known, how he should have seen this coming. Mom hasn't stopped crying." "Good," I said, surprising myself with the venom in my voice. "They should feel terrible. They threw away their daughter for the sake of their image, and now they're realizing what they lost." "They want to see you," Chloe said quietly. "They're desperate to make things right. Dad's been practicing apology speeches in his office, and Mom keeps asking me what she can do to fix this." "There's nothing they can do to fix it," I said. "They showed me their true colors, Chloe. When push came to shove, they chose their new wealthy friends over their own daughter. That's not something you can apologize for." Chloe set down her coffee mug and looked at me directly. "Can I tell you something? Something I've never told anyone?" I nodded. "When I was a sophomore in college, I was struggling. Bad. My grades were slipping. I was depressed. And I started having panic attacks. I was seriously considering dropping out." She paused, taking a shaky breath. "Do you know what kept me going? You." "Me? You called me every week, even when you were barely making ends meet. You'd send me care packages with my favorite snacks and encouraging notes. When I had that breakdown during finals week, you drove up to Eugene and stayed with me for 3 days, sleeping on my dorm room floor and helping me study. You never made me feel like a failure, even when I felt like giving up." I remembered that time. Chloe had seemed so overwhelmed, so different from her usual confident self. I'd used my vacation days from a previous job to help her, spending money I couldn't afford on gas and food. "That's what family does," I said. "Exactly," Chloe replied. "That's what family does. But our parents forgot that when it mattered most. They forgot that you're the one who taught me resilience, who showed me that success isn't just about money or status. It's about character and kindness and showing up for the people you love." Her words hit me harder than I'd expected. I'd been so focused on my anger and hurt that I'd forgotten about the good times, the ways we'd supported each other over the years. "I've been thinking about this a lot," Chloe continued. "And I think part of the reason they reacted so badly is because they were scared. Dad's business success was new, the lottery money was new, and they were trying so hard to fit into this wealthy social circle that they lost sight of what actually mattered. But that doesn't excuse what they did to you." I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the city. "Do you know what the worst part was?" I said. "It wasn't being kicked out. It wasn't spending Christmas alone in a motel room. It was realizing that their love was conditional, that I was only valuable to them if I met their standards of success." "But, Elena," Chloe said softly, "isn't your love becoming conditional too? You're only willing to consider forgiving them now that you've proven yourself successful. What if you hadn't won the lottery? Would you have ever tried to repair the relationship?" The question stopped me cold. She was right, and I hated that. She was right. "That's different," I said defensively. "They're the ones who set the conditions. They're the ones who said I wasn't good enough." "And now you're saying they're not good enough," Chloe replied. "I'm not defending what they did, Elena. It was wrong and cruel, and they deserve to feel guilty about it. But if you cut them off forever, aren't you doing the same thing they did to you? Deciding that love should be conditional on behavior?" I turned back to face her, feeling a mix of anger and confusion. "So what are you suggesting? That I just forgive and forget? Pretend it never happened?" "I'm suggesting that maybe there's a middle ground," Chloe said. "Maybe you can acknowledge that they hurt you terribly while also acknowledging that people can change and grow. Maybe you can use your position of strength to set new terms for the relationship instead of just ending it." We spent the rest of the afternoon talking about our childhood, about the family we used to be before money and status became more important than love. Chloe told me about her job search, about her relationship with Marcus, about her fears for the future. I told her about the foundation, about my plans for Morrison's Auto Parts, about the strange experience of suddenly having more money than I could ever spend. As evening approached, I offered to show her the youth center where my foundation was, making a difference. We drove through Southeast Portland to the converted warehouse where Sarah and her team were working with dozens of young people who had been rejected by their own families. "This is incredible," Chloe said as we walked through the facility. "You're giving these kids what our parents failed to give you: unconditional support and belief in their potential." I watched a group of teenagers working on job applications with volunteer counselors, their faces serious with concentration and hope. "These kids have been through hell," I said. "They've been abandoned, abused, neglected. But they keep fighting for a better life. They don't give up. Like you didn't give up," Chloe observed. "I almost did," I admitted. "After Christmas Eve, I felt like maybe they were right about me. Maybe I really was a failure who would never amount to anything. But you didn't let that define you. You used it as motivation to prove them wrong." We were quiet for a moment, watching the young people around us working toward their goals despite impossible odds. "I want to meet with them," I said finally. "Mom and Dad. But not to reconcile, not to pretend everything is fine. I want them to understand what they did, what they lost, and what it's going to take if they ever want a relationship with me again." Chloe smiled for the first time all day. "I think that's exactly what needs to happen." As we drove back to my house, I felt something shift inside me. The anger was still there, but it was no longer consuming. I had built a life I was proud of, surrounded myself with people who valued me for who I was rather than what I had accomplished. I had the power now to decide what kind of family relationships I wanted and on what terms. The reckoning with my parents was coming, but I would face it from a position of strength, not as the broken woman they had cast out on Christmas Eve. I would decide whether they deserved a place in the life I had built, and what that place would look like. For the first time since winning the lottery, I felt truly ready for whatever came next. I chose neutral ground for the meeting, a private dining room at the Heathman Hotel in downtown Portland, somewhere public enough that no one could storm out dramatically, but private enough for the hard conversations that needed to happen. I arrived 30 minutes early, wanting to be settled and composed when they walked in. The maitre d' had prepared the room exactly as I'd requested: a round table to avoid power dynamics, fresh flowers, and afternoon tea service. I wore a navy blue dress that I'd bought for foundation board meetings, professional but not ostentatious. I wanted them to see the woman I'd become, not the struggling daughter they remembered. My parents arrived precisely on time, both of them, looking older than when I'd seen them just 6 weeks ago. Dad's hair seemed grayer, and Mom moved with the hesitant steps of someone who wasn't sure of their welcome. They were dressed in their finest clothes, as if this were a business meeting, rather than a family reconciliation. Elena. Mom's voice broke as she said my name. She moved toward me as if to hug, then stopped when she saw my body language. Mom. Dad. I gestured to the chairs across from me. Please, sit down. The formal politeness felt strange after a lifetime of casual family interactions, but I needed the distance it provided. I couldn't afford to let emotion derail this conversation before it started. You look wonderful, Dad said, settling into his chair. Success suits you. Does it? I asked. Because 6 weeks ago you told me I'd never amount to anything. That I was an embarrassment to the family. Funny how perspective changes when there's money involved. He flinched as if I'd slapped him. Elena, I never said you were an embarrassment. You said my presence created tension you didn't need. You said I was a reminder of who you used to be, and that didn't fit the narrative you were building. What would you call that? Mom leaned forward, her eyes already brimming with tears. Sweetheart, we were wrong. So terribly wrong. We got caught, up in the excitement of our new circumstances, and lost sight of what really mattered. Which was you, she said simply. Our family. Our daughter, who we raised to be kind and hardworking and compassionate. All the qualities that made you successful now. I poured tea for all of us, using the ritual to maintain my composure. Tell me about your new circumstances, I said. The lottery win, the business success. When did having money become more important than having integrity? Dad shifted uncomfortably in his seat. It wasn't about the money itself. It was about the opportunities it created. The chance to give Chloe advantages we never had. To secure our future. To finally feel like we belonged somewhere. Belong where? With people who would judge you based on your bank account? With friends who would drop you the moment your circumstances changed? We thought we were protecting the family's interests, he said defensively. Building something that would benefit everyone in the long run. Everyone except me, apparently. The silence stretched between us, broken only by the soft clink of teacups and the distant sound of traffic from the street below. I watched my parents squirm in their chairs, finally experiencing the discomfort they had put me through. There's something you need to understand, I said finally. When you threw me out on Christmas Eve, you didn't just reject me. You revealed who you really are when tested. And that's not something you can take back with apologies and explanations. Mom started crying in earnest now. We were scared, Elena. The money changed everything so fast and we didn't know how to handle it. We made terrible decisions, but they came from fear, not malice. Fear of what? That having a daughter who worked retail would somehow diminish your new status? That your country club friends would think less of you? Yes, Dad said quietly, surprising me with his honesty. That's exactly what we were afraid of, and we were wrong to let that fear drive our decisions. I studied his face, looking for signs of manipulation or insincerity. Instead, I saw genuine remorse mixed with shame. It was more honest than I'd expected from him. "Do you know what I did after you kicked me out?" I asked. "I spent Christmas Day alone in a motel room, eating vending machine food, and wondering if maybe you were right about me. If maybe I really was a failure who would never amount to anything." Both of them were crying now, but I pressed on. I needed them to understand the full weight of what they had done. I had won $47 million, and I was sitting in that room thinking I wasn't worth loving. That's what your conditional love did to me. It made me question my own value as a human being. "Oh, Elena," Mom whispered. "We never meant—" "But you did mean it," I interrupted. "In that moment when it counted, you meant every word. You chose your image over your daughter. You chose strangers' opinions over family loyalty. And now that I've proven I can be successful, you want to pretend it never happened." Dad leaned forward, his business negotiation posture abandoned for something more said. "But there has to be something." "That's what I'm trying to figure out," I said. "Because the truth is, I miss you. I miss having a family. But I don't know if I can trust you not to abandon me again the moment I disappoint you." "You won't disappoint us again?" Mom said quickly. "That's not the point," I replied. "The point is that love shouldn't be dependent on performance. The point is that family should be a safe harbor, not a place where you have to earn your welcome." I stood up and walked to the window, looking down at the busy street below. People were going about their lives, unaware of the drama playing out in this hotel room. Most of them probably had complicated family relationships too, full of old wounds and unresolved conflicts. "I've built something here," I said, still facing the window. "A business that helps people, a foundation that gives kids the support their own families couldn't provide. I've surrounded myself with people who value me for who I am, not what I can do for them." "We're proud of you," Dad said. "What you've accomplished is incredible." I turned back to face them. "Are you proud of me, or proud of what I've accomplished? Because there's a difference." The question hung in the air like a challenge. After a long moment, Dad spoke. "I'm proud of the woman you've become, the way you've used your success to help others instead of just accumulating wealth, the strength you've shown in rebuilding your life after we—" He paused, struggling with the words. "After we failed you so completely. I'm proud of your character," Mom added. "Your compassion. The fact that you're even sitting here talking to us after what we did shows a grace we don't deserve." Their words felt genuine, but I wasn't ready to forgive yet. "Here's what's going to happen," I said, sitting back down. "If you want any kind of relationship with me going forward, it's going to be on my terms. No more conditional love. No more judging me based on external metrics of success. No more choosing your social status over your family." "We agree," Dad said immediately. "I'm not finished," I continued. "You're going to earn your way back into my life. You're going to prove that you've learned something from this experience, and you're going to start by making amends for the damage you've done." "What kind of amends?" Mom asked. "You're going to volunteer at my foundation, both of you. You're going to work directly with young people who've been rejected by their families, and you're going to understand firsthand what that kind of abandonment does to a person." They exchanged glances, and I could see them calculating the social implications of volunteering at a homeless youth center. "If that thought bothers you," I said, reading their expressions, "then you haven't learned anything at all." "It doesn't bother us," Dad said quickly. "We want to help. We want to understand." "Good, because that's the price of admission back into my life. Not your money, not your apologies, but your time and effort to make the world a little better. For people who've been through what I went through." I stood up again, signaling that the meeting was coming to an end. "This isn't forgiveness," I said. "This is probation. You'll start volunteering next week, and we'll see how you do. If you can prove that you've genuinely changed, that you understand what family loyalty really means, then maybe we can rebuild something together." And if we can't prove it? Mom asked quietly. Then this is goodbye, I said simply. I won't go through this again. I won't let you hurt me again. I'm stronger now, and I know my worth isn't dependent on your approval. As they prepared to leave, Dad turned back to me one more time. Elena, I need you to know something. Losing you was the biggest mistake of my life. Not because of the money. You won, but because of the daughter I threw away. I don't know if I can ever forgive myself for that. You don't need to forgive yourself, I replied. You need to make sure you never do it again. To anyone. After they left, I sat alone in the private dining room for another hour, processing what had just happened. I felt drained but also empowered. I had faced them from a position of strength, set clear boundaries, and refused to let their remorse manipulate me into easy forgiveness. The real test would come in the weeks ahead. Would they follow through on their commitment to volunteer? Would they genuinely try to understand the impact of their actions? Or would this just be another performance, designed to get back into the good graces of their suddenly wealthy daughter? Only time would tell. But for the first time since Christmas Eve, I felt like I was in control of my own story. 3 weeks passed before I heard anything from my parents. I'd begun to wonder if they'd decided that volunteering at a homeless youth center was too steep a price for reconciliation. Then Sarah called me on a Tuesday morning, her voice full of surprise. Elena, your parents are here, she said. They showed up an hour ago asking about volunteer opportunities. They said you'd spoken to them about it? I was in my office at Morrison's, flagship location, reviewing expansion plans for our third store. What are they doing exactly? I asked. Your father is helping Jerry organize the tool donation room. Apparently, he knows a lot about construction equipment. Your mother is in the kitchen with the cooking class, teaching some of the girls how to make bread from scratch. This wasn't what I'd expected. I'd imagined they would show up, do the minimum required to check a box, and expect instant forgiveness. Actually rolling up their sleeves and working was different. How are they interacting with the kids? I asked. That's the surprising part, Sarah said. Your mom is really connecting with this one girl, Jessica, who's been having a hard time opening up to anyone. And your dad? He's been listening to Marcus tell his story about getting kicked out for being gay, and I saw him wipe away tears. I felt a strange mixture of emotions, surprise, skepticism, and something that might have been hope. Keep an eye on them, I said. I want to know if this is genuine or just for show. Over the next few weeks, I got regular reports from Sarah and the other staff members. My parents showed up every Tuesday and Thursday evening, always staying for the full 3-hour shift. Dad had organized a carpentry workshop where he taught basic home repair skills. Mom had expanded the cooking program and was also helping with GED tutoring. More importantly, they were learning the stories of the young people they worked with. Kids who'd been thrown out for being LGBTQ+, for getting pregnant, for struggling with addiction, for simply not meeting their families' expectations. Each story was a mirror reflecting their own actions back at them. A month into their volunteer work, I decided to make an unannounced visit to the center. I arrived during the dinner service and watched from the kitchen doorway as Mom worked alongside Jessica, the girl Sarah had mentioned. Jessica was 18, rail thin, with purple hair and tattoos covering her arms. She'd been kicked out at 16 for refusing to follow her religious parents' strict rules. The secret to good bread is patience, Mom was saying, showing Jessica how to knead the dough. You can't rush the process. You have to give it time to rise properly. My grandmother used to make bread, Jessica said quietly, before my parents decided I wasn't worth knowing anymore. Mom's hands stilled on the dough. I'm sorry that happened to you. Parents should never make their children feel unwanted. Yeah. Well, some parents care more about their reputation than their kids, Jessica replied with bitter wisdom beyond her years. I watched Mom's face crumple slightly, the words hitting their intended target. But instead of getting defensive or walking away, she continued kneading the dough. "You're right," Mom said quietly. "And those parents are making the biggest mistake of their lives. Because children like you, resilient, brave, working to build better lives despite everything. You're exactly the kind of people parents should be proud of." Jessica looked up at her in surprise. "You really think so?" "I know so," Mom replied firmly. "And any parent who can't see that doesn't deserve you." I moved away before they could notice me, my throat tight with unexpected emotion. In the main room, I found Dad sitting with a group of teenagers who were working on job applications. One of them, a young man named David, was struggling with the section about previous addresses. "I don't know what to put," David was saying. "I've been homeless for 2 years. I've stayed in shelters, on friends' couches, in my car when I had one. Who's going to hire someone like me? Someone who recognizes that you've survived things most people couldn't handle," Dad said. "Someone who sees that you're still fighting for a better life instead of giving up. That takes a character that can't be taught." "Easy for you to say," David replied. "You probably never had to worry about where you were sleeping." Dad was quiet for a moment. "You're right, I didn't. I've been very fortunate. But I've learned recently that having a roof over your head doesn't make you a good person. And not having one doesn't make you a bad person. What makes you a good person is how you treat others, especially when you have nothing to gain from it." "So why are you here?" David asked bluntly. "Rich guys like you could be doing anything with your time." Dad looked around the room, his eyes settling on a photo of Sarah and me at the foundation's opening ceremony. "Because I need to learn how to be a better person, and the young people here are teaching me things I should have known all along." Later that evening, I called my parents and asked them to meet me at my house. They arrived looking tired, but somehow lighter than they had in months. The volunteer work was clearly affecting them in ways I hadn't anticipated. We sat in my living room, the same space where Chloe and I had our heart-to-heart conversation weeks earlier. But the dynamic felt different now. My parents seemed more humble, less concerned with managing their image. "How are you finding volunteer work?" I asked. "Humbling," Dad said immediately. "These kids have been through hell, Elena. Real hell, and they're still fighting to make something of their lives. It makes our problems seem pretty small in comparison." "I've been thinking about Jessica a lot," Mom added. "She reminds me of you in some ways. Determined, resourceful, stronger than she should have to be. But she's been carrying this burden of rejection that no child should have to carry." "And it made you think about what you did to me," I said. "It wasn't a question. Every single day," Mom replied, her voice breaking. "Every time I see one of these kids struggle with feeling unwanted, I think about how we made you feel that way. How we became the kind of parents we always swore we'd never be." Dad leaned forward in his chair. "Elena, I need to tell you something. Working at the center has changed how I see everything. My business, my money, my priorities. I used to think success was about accumulating wealth and status, but watching these kids fight for basic dignity and opportunity, that's shown me what real success looks like." "Which is?" "Using whatever advantages you have to lift other people up," he said. "Making sure no one feels as alone and worthless as we made you feel." I studied their faces, looking for signs of performance or manipulation. Instead, I saw genuine transformation. The people sitting in my living room weren't the same ones who had kicked me out on Christmas Eve. They were humbled, aware of their failures, and actively working to become better. "There's something else," Mom said. "We've been talking about making some changes. Big ones." "What kind of changes?" "We want to sell the house," Dad said. "The renovations, the expensive furniture, the whole image we built. It doesn't feel right anymore. We want to downsize and donate the difference to your foundation." I wasn't prepared for this. "That's a big decision. You don't need to prove anything to me with grand gestures." "It's not about proving anything to you," Mom said. It's about living according to our values instead of our vanity. We got so caught up in looking successful that we forgot what actually matters. We're also leaving the country club, Dad added. Most of those people weren't real friends anyway. They were just connections we thought we needed for business and social standing. What about your business relationships? Won't this hurt your company? Dad smiled, and for the first time in months, it reached his eyes. Funny thing about that. Once I started being honest about who I really am instead of trying to impress everyone, I started attracting better clients, people who value integrity over image. Business is actually better than ever. We talked for another 2 hours about their experiences at the center, about the young people they'd met, about the lessons they were learning. I watched my parents rediscover the values they'd raised me with: compassion, hard work, pudding, family before everything else. I want to keep volunteering, Mom said as they prepared to leave. Not because you asked us to, but because it's important work. These kids need to know that some adults won't abandon them. And I want to help expand the job training program, Dad added. Use my business connections to create real opportunities for these young people. Give them the chances they deserve. After they left, I sat in my living room processing what had just happened. This wasn't the performance I'd expected. This was genuine change, sparked by exposure to the reality of what family rejection actually meant. For the first time since Christmas Eve, I felt like I was looking at my real parents again. Not the people who had been corrupted by money and status, but the ones who had raised me to believe that everyone deserves dignity and opportunity. The test wasn't over. Real change takes time to prove itself. But for the first time, I began to believe that forgiveness might actually be possible. Not the cheap forgiveness that pretends nothing happened, but the hard-earned kind that acknowledges damage done and changes made. My family was still broken, but maybe it could be rebuilt on a stronger foundation, one based on genuine love rather than conditional approval, on character rather than achievement, on who we were rather than what we had. 6 months later, I stood in the kitchen of my parents' new home, a modest 3-bedroom ranch in a middle-class neighborhood that looked nothing like the mansion they'd sold. The granite countertops and designer appliances were gone, replaced by practical Formica and basic appliances that worked just fine. But the house felt warmer somehow, more like the home I remembered from childhood. "Elena, can you grab the salad? From the fridge?" Mom called from the dining room, where she was setting the table for our first family dinner since Christmas Eve. The dining room table was the same one from my childhood, the wooden piece they'd replaced with glass and chrome during their renovation phase. They'd bought it back from the estate sale company, along with several other pieces of original furniture. The expensive china was gone too, replaced by the everyday dishes we'd always used for family meals. Chloe arrived with Marcus, her boyfriend, who was meeting the family for the first time. He seemed nervous, clutching a bottle of wine and clearly unsure what to expect from this unconventional family gathering. "So, you're the lottery winner," he said when I introduced myself. "Chloe told me your story. It's pretty incredible." "Which part?" I asked, genuinely curious. "All of it. But especially how you use the money to help other people instead of just buying expensive toys. That says a lot about your character." Dad emerged from his home office, looking more relaxed then. I'd seen him in years. He'd lost the designer clothes and perfectly styled hair, returning to the casual polo shirts and comfortable jeans he'd always preferred. His construction business was thriving, but he'd restructured it to focus on affordable housing projects and community development rather than luxury developments. "Marcus, good to meet you," Dad said, shaking his hand. "Chloe's told us great things about you." We gathered around the familiar table, and for a moment it felt like stepping back in time to Sunday dinners from my childhood. But this wasn't the past. It was something new, built on the foundation of who we used to be but strengthened by everything we'd learned. "Before we eat," Mom said, "I want to share some news. The Foundation Board approved our proposal for the new transitional housing complex. We'll be able to provide stable housing for 50 more young people aging out of foster care. The "we" felt significant. My parents had become integral parts of the Fresh Start Foundation, contributing not just their time, but their expertise. Dad's construction company was building the new complex at cost, and Mom had become the program coordinator for life skills training. That's incredible, Chloe said. How many kids will that help overall? With our 3 locations, we're now serving over 200 young people annually, I said. It's beyond what I ever imagined when we started. What's next? Marcus asked. Are you planning to expand to other cities? I exchanged glances with my parents. We'd been discussing this possibility for weeks, but hadn't made any final decisions. We've been talking about it, Dad said. There are a lot of communities that could benefit from programs like this, but we want to make sure we're doing it right, not just doing it fast. Quality over quantity, Mom added. These kids deserve programs that actually work, not just good intentions. The conversation flowed naturally throughout dinner, covering everything from Chloe's new job at a sustainable energy company, to Marcus's plans for law school, to my parents' latest volunteer projects. But underneath the normalcy, I was aware of how far we'd all come. After dinner, as we cleared dishes and prepared dessert, Mom pulled me aside in the kitchen. Elena, I want to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me, she said, her voice serious. Okay. Do you forgive us? Really forgive us? Not just tolerate us because we're family? The question I'd been avoiding for months was finally out in the open. I'd been watching my parents change, seeing their genuine remorse and effort to make amends. But forgiveness was different from acknowledgement of change. I'm working on it, I said honestly. Some days I feel like I've forgiven you completely. Other days the hurt comes back and I remember how it felt to be thrown away like garbage. But I think that's normal. I think forgiveness is a process, not a destination. Mom nodded, tears gathering in her eyes. I understand. And I want you to know that we don't expect forgiveness just because we've changed. We know we broke something precious, and we're grateful for every chance you give us to prove we've learned from our mistakes. The work you're doing at the foundation, I said, helping kids who've been through what I went through, that means more to me than any apology ever could. You're making sure other families don't make the same mistakes you did. It's the least we can do, she replied. Those kids have taught us more about parenting than we ever learned raising you and Chloe. About unconditional love, about not giving up on people, about seeing potential instead of just problems. Dad appeared in the doorway, carrying empty glasses from the living room. Are we having a serious conversation without me? He asked lightly. Just telling Elena how much the foundation work has meant to us, Mom said. Dad set down the glasses and looked at me seriously. Elena, I need you to know something. Winning the lottery didn't make me proud of you. I was always proud of you. I just lost sight of it when I got caught up in appearances and status. You were always the daughter who worked hard, who treated people with kindness, who never gave up. The money just gave you the platform to show the world what I should have been celebrating all along. These were the words I'd needed to hear for months. Not pride in my success, but pride in who I was as a person. Thank you, I said simply. We rejoined the others in the living room, where Chloe was showing Marcus photo albums from our childhood. Pictures of family vacations, birthday parties, school events, evidence of the loving family we'd been before money complicated everything. You all look so happy, Marcus observed. We were, Chloe said. We just lost our way for a while. But I think we're finding our way back. As the evening wound down, my parents walked me to my car. The neighborhood was quiet, with porch lights glowing and the sounds of other families settling in for the night. Elena, Dad said, I want to tell you something I should have said months ago. When you were growing up, I used to worry that you were too sensitive, too trusting, too willing to put others first. I thought those qualities would make life harder for you. They did make life harder, I said. But they also made it better. Exactly. And watching you use your lottery win to help others, seeing how you've built something meaningful instead of just accumulating wealth, it's shown me that those qualities I worried about were actually your greatest strengths. Your compassion changed our lives, Mom added. Not just by giving us a chance to make amends, but by showing us what it looks like to use advantages to lift others up instead of just elevating yourself. 6 months ago, I'd been working at an auto parts store, living paycheck to paycheck and feeling like a failure. Now I was running a successful business and foundation, living in a beautiful home, and rebuilding relationships I'd thought were lost forever. But the real transformation wasn't in my circumstances, it was in understanding my own worth. I no longer needed my parents' approval to feel valuable. I no longer defined myself by their standards or anyone else's. The lottery money had given me financial freedom, but the real freedom came from learning that my value wasn't conditional on achievement or approval. I love you both, I said as I got into my car. And I'm proud of the work we're doing together. We love you too, Mom said. And we're proud of the woman you've always been, not just the one you became after winning the lottery. Driving home. Through the quiet Portland streets, I thought about the journey that had brought us all to this point. From the devastating rejection on Christmas Eve, to the shocking lottery win, to the slow, careful process of rebuilding trust and family bonds. The story could have ended in bitterness and permanent estrangement. My parents could have remained, trapped in their shallow pursuit of status. I could have used my wealth to punish them forever, proving my superiority while nursing old wounds. Instead, we'd all chosen the harder path, the one that required genuine change, uncomfortable honesty, and the courage to admit when we were wrong. The path that led to forgiveness not as a gift to those who'd hurt us, but as a gift to ourselves. My phone buzzed with a text from Sarah at the foundation. Jessica got accepted to community college. She wanted you to know that your mom's encouragement helped her believe she could do it. I smiled, thinking about the full circle we'd traveled. The girl who'd been abandoned by her family was now thriving, supported by people who understood the pain of rejection because they'd caused it themselves. My parents' journey from perpetrators to healers was nearly complete. Money had started this story, but it wasn't really about money at all. It was about family, forgiveness, and the courage to change. It was about learning that success isn't measured by what you accumulate, but by what you contribute. And it was about discovering that sometimes the greatest gifts come disguised as the worst disasters. $47 million had changed my life, but not in the way anyone might have expected. It hadn't made me happy. It had given me the power to choose happiness. It hadn't fixed my family. It had given us the opportunity to fix ourselves. And in the end, that opportunity was worth more than any amount of money. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.